Welcome to a Sportico interview with U.S. Senator Roger Wicker, the ranking member of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. Senator Wicker has been a leader in Congress on the topic of name, image, and likeness long before it became possible under NCAA rules. Senator Wicker has represented Mississippi in the Senate since 2007 and previously was a congressman and state senator. He also served our country in the military, including service on active duty as a judge advocate in the U.S. Air Force, and he's a retired lieutenant colonel in the U.S. Air Force Reserve. Senator Wicker, good morning. Thank you for spending some time with us today. This month, you reintroduced the Collegiate Athlete Compensation Rights Act, which would create a national framework for student-athlete NIL compensation. What led you to reintroduce the bill now 15 months after states' NIL statutes went into effect?
Okay, I introduced the bill 2 years ago when I was actually chairman of the Commerce Committee. As you know, a lot has happened since then. I think we wanted to wait until college football was starting again, and it might be an appropriate time to raise this again. In the meantime, states have been doing their own statutes. My state of Mississippi came along. I think maybe Florida was the first. It seemed to us that, and seemed to a lot of people on both the Democrat and Republican side, that we ought to have a consistent law across the nation. If a kid from Jackson, Mississippi wants to play college football, he doesn't need to be recruited from Florida State University under one set of name, image, and likeness rules, and by LSU or Jackson State, Mississippi under another set of rules. And that's what was happening. And it's still the case. A lot of states were not getting involved in this then until the NCAA came along and decided to open the door to every college athlete being able to profit from the use of their name, image, likeness. And so that's the reason I thought we'd take another stab at this, even in the closing days of this session. And I don't know, maybe get something done between the election and the new year when a new Senate and a new House will take over.
Building on that, it's been said that the NIL market has become something of the modern day Wild West.
Absolutely.
Right. So, and the NCAA has been passive, to be honest, about enforcing its amateurism rules with respect to NIL. You sounds like you agree with that. And what do you think has led to this situation?
Well, what's led to the situation is there's, let's face it, there's a lot of money in college sports, particularly college football and college basketball. College baseball is getting huge, as we've seen over the past few years. And I will interject here that in 2021, Mississippi State won the national championship, the College World Series, and in 2022, the Ole Miss Rebels baseball team. So it's big also, and there's just a lot of money to be made by the universities. And I think on the issue of whether we should do this, the ship has sailed. I think that issue has been answered. Yes, student athletes will be able to profit from their name, image, and likeness. And the question is, are we going to have a consistent national a national set of rules, or a patchwork across the nation? And also, what protections need to be in place, and who will enforce that? I would enforce it through the Federal Trade Commission. I would be very skeptical of empowering the NCAA, which to me is a bit non-transparent. I would be reluctant to put them in charge of actually enforcing that.
Thank you. And one branch of NIL that has surprised a lot of people that wasn't talked about before it came into being is the role of collectives, which, as you know, often involve boosters and other groups that form associations to pay athletes and recruits for their NIL. Some believe it's not really NIL, it's really pay for play. Nick Saban has been very critical of collectives. Do you agree with that concern? And if you do, does your bill address that in any way?
Well, is it any surprise that this would happen when thousands of alums at almost every major university in the big conferences write checks for tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of dollars to build facilities, to have gates named after them? Is it any surprise that there would be a lot of money pooled? And in one sense, the collectives could be defended as giving the less prominent players an opportunity to have name, image, and likeness. The right guard, offensive guard maybe doesn't get quite as much publicity, doesn't have quite as much a chance for the Heisman as a quarterback or a receiver or something like that. What we need to make sure of is that these contributions to name, image, and likeness are not inducements. Come to our school, and we can guarantee you a nice chunk of name, image, and likeness that we've set aside for defensive backs or for sophomores on our team. And when it becomes an inducement, that's pay for play. So my bill would prohibit collectives from doing pay for play. It would also, of course, prohibit anyone from doing pay for play. And I would prohibit also in my bill, I would prohibit agents from being able to sign up high school students. At some point they get to college, I think the decision, rightly or wrongly, has been collectively made that this is going to be allowed. You mentioned Nick Saban, and I share a lot of his concerns. I can tell you that somebody who also coached in the state of Alabama and is now in the U.S. Senate, Tommy Tuberville, is concerned about this. And for several months now, he's been struggling with getting a bill together. And I think he's run into the same, he's run into some of the same complications that I have and others have over time. There are people more on the left side of the spectrum who would go much further. Senator Tuberville, Coach Saban, and people like me would make it clear that we want to keep the amateur nature of the sport. And there are people who would allow unionization of college players, requirement of benefits, health insurance that would go past the student experience and last for years and years. I think at some point there, the student athlete becomes a professional, and we've lost the amateur nature of the sport. I don't think I'm old fashioned, but I'm traditional enough that as much money as is spent and as important it is to the fans as represented by the money spent, I would like to keep that amateur aspect of it and let the students be student athletes.
It's interesting, at the state level, we saw, and part of it was they were rushing to get something done, but we saw overwhelming majorities of Republicans and Democrats passing NIL statutes that were targeted on NIL. At the federal level, it seems, like you mentioned, there's something of a divide between a bill like yours that's really targeted on NIL, creating a system in place, versus other bills, like you mentioned, that call for more transformative change, whether it's right or wrong. It just are things that are not about NIL. Is there going to be a way of bridging that divide, or is this sort of the way it's going to remain?
Well, there usually is eventually a way to bridge that divide. Let me just go back to the founding fathers. When they set up this system of the House and the Senate, with the Senate being the cooling saucer of the coffee cup, they meant for things to take time and for a more deliberative process, and for two bodies to take a stab at it. So actually, I think John Adams and James Madison would be utterly delighted that it takes time for us to get consensus here. It will eventually get there. And again, I say between the election and the new year, that might be an opportunity. Depending on who wins the majority, it might be that we'd rather just go ahead and come to some sort of consensus before the new majority takes place. And then again, if there are really transformative changes in the makeup of the House and Senate, for example, if more conservatives win elections, if the Republicans win the majorities, I think there'll be less of a push after the new year to avoid the professionalism and unionization of college athletes.
Let's say the Republicans gain control of both houses. How does that affect your leadership on this issue? B, do you think your bill becomes more likely to pass? And then C, let's say it does pass. Do you have any sense of President Biden, where he is on this topic?
I think President Biden will sign whatever we send him. And as far as I know, he hasn't been involved, and I haven't heard too much from the administration about this. I think he'll let us make the decision there. It's not one of the pressing issues of the day for the administration. In terms of my leadership, after the first of the year, I will not be chairman of the Commerce Committee. If Republicans win the majority, Senator Ted Cruz of Texas will become chairman. If Democrats retain the majority in the Senate, of course, Senator Maria Cantwell of the state of Washington will be chairman. So I'll move over to either chairman or ranking Republican of the Armed Services Committee. I'll still be a member of the Commerce Committee, which has jurisdiction over this issue. And that doesn't keep me from pressing my own bills, but in terms of who calls up a bill for consideration, according to our rules, the only person who could put a bill on the floor is the majority leader, and we don't know who the majority leader will be after the first of the year. So everybody needs to get out and vote. Express your will.
Your bill would clarify that student athletes I'm quoting, shall not be considered an employee of their school conference. Right. You mentioned this before. This is obviously a topic that has sparked a lot of controversy, now litigation. How do you reach that conclusion?
Well, I reached the conclusion that we need to keep the student athlete. I mean, it's hard enough now for the young man or woman on the college campus to do all of the things expected of them by the fans and remain a student. To me, the step that would go way too far would be to make them an employee, which would give them collective bargaining rights. And I do not believe that sort of bill would overcome a filibuster in the United States Senate. To me, it's a non-starter with anything like the makeup we have of the U.S. Senate.
And there would be significant economic consequences if something like that were to come to pass. I know some schools have expressed a concern about the impact on their budget in a scenario where.
Well, true. And I'll tell you, I get calls from alums who were student athletes 5 years ago, 10 years ago, and they talk about the great experience they had as a student athlete. They weren't able to go on and be professionals. 99% of them just go on and use their free college education and all the benefits they had to be a productive citizen out in the economy. And they are concerned that some people would completely change the nature of the sport. Let me say also, I've got to participate in a hearing at the top of the hour, so I'm going to have to answer another question or two quickly and move on, if you don't mind.
You got, no, we've covered all the bases, and I really appreciate you making time today, Senator Wicker, and I wish you well, and I look forward to continuing this conversation.
Yeah.